a cold wind swept through the compound, extinguishing all the fires. The sky darkened, as though a great hand had drawn a cloth across the sun. A voice, ancient and terrible, echoed through the air. You who have shown contempt for the sacred shall know the weight of your disrespect. Until you learn humility and truth, you shall never again know the comfort of lying down. From that moment forward, Adebayo found himself unable to lie down. Whenever he tried, an invisible force would hold him upright. He tried everything: sleeping potions from the marketplace, ritual cleansings recommended by village elders, but the invisible force remained unrelenting, holding him upright with the strength of 1,000 hands. In a prosperous village nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, where ancient bamboo trees stood sentinel over generations of stories, there lived a wealthy merchant named Adebayo. His compound stretched as far as the eye could see, with granaries bursting with yams and corn, and corrals teeming with healthy cattle. The villagers whispered that his wealth exceeded that of 7 chiefs combined, but none dared to question its source openly. His influence stretched across 3 provinces, and even the king's tax collectors treated him with careful respect. Every morning, Adebayo would stand at the highest point of his compound, watching the sun rise over his vast possessions. His elaborate robes, woven with threads of gold, rustled in the morning breeze, and his heavy coral beads clicked together with each satisfied nod of his head. But wealth, no matter how vast, cannot fill the hollow spaces in one's heart. Adebayo's first wife, Folami, had passed away 3 rainy seasons ago, leaving him alone in his vast compound. The loneliness began to gnaw at him, especially during the long nights when the only sounds were the distant hooting of owls and the whispers of the wind through the palm trees. His huge bed, carved from rare hardwood and draped with the finest cloths from across the seas, felt as empty as a desert well in the dry season. It was during the festival of New Yams that he first saw Aisha. She was the daughter of a respected diviner from a neighboring village, and her beauty was matched only by her kindness. Her laughter was like the sweet chiming of little bells, and her wisdom ran as deep as an ancient river. Unlike others who approached Adebayo with fearful respect or barely concealed greed, Aisha looked directly into his eyes when she spoke, her gaze clear and unafraid. Their courtship was the talk of 7 villages. Adebayo spared no expense in his pursuit, sending gifts that would have impressed a king. And she appreciated him so much, and they courted for a while. When she agreed to become his wife, Adebayo felt truly blessed by the gods. The wedding celebrations lasted 7 days and 7 nights, with enough food and palm wine to feed 3 villages. Praise singers composed new songs about the couple's beauty and prosperity, and dancers from distant lands performed until their feet wore paths in the earth. However, their happiness was short-lived. On the 8th day, as Adebayo walked through his compound inspecting his properties, he came upon an ancient shrine hidden behind overgrown bushes. The shrine was dedicated to Ajaloran, the spirit of justice and truth. In a moment of pride and arrogance, Adebayo ordered his servants to kick over the shrine, scattering the sacred objects and spilling the offerings. "I have no need for such primitive beliefs," he declared. "My wealth is all the protection I need." He intended to use the spot to build a new trading post. As the last sacred calabash shattered against the ground, a cold wind swept through the compound, extinguishing all the fires. The sky darkened, as though a great hand had drawn a cloth across the sun. A voice, ancient and terrible, echoed through the air. You who have shown contempt for the sacred shall know the weight of your disrespect. Until you learn humility and truth, you shall never again know the comfort of lying down. Let your nights be spent as you have lived, standing tall in your pride. From that moment forward, Adebayo found himself unable to lie down. Whenever he tried, an invisible force would hold him upright. He could walk, sit, and go about his daily business. But when night fell, he could only sleep while standing, like a tree rooted to the earth. His nights became torture, his sleep fragmented and shallow. The first few weeks were the hardest. Adebayo, a man accustomed to controlling every aspect of his life, found himself at the mercy of this inexplicable affliction. He tried everything: Sleeping potions from the marketplace, ritual cleansings recommended by village elders, even attempting to tie himself down to his bed. But the invisible force remained unrelenting, holding him upright with the strength of 1,000 hands. His young wife, Aisha, watched with growing concern as her husband changed before her eyes. The proud merchant who once strode through the marketplace like a king now moved like a man carrying an invisible burden. Dark circles appeared beneath his eyes, deepening with each passing day. His voice, once commanding and sure, became brittle with exhaustion. Initially, Adebayo insisted on sleeping alone in his private chamber, unwilling to let even Isha witness his humiliation. "It is nothing," he would say, waving away her concerns with a trembling hand. "Just some business matters keeping me occupied at night." But the excuses grew thin as his condition worsened. One night, during the harsh Harmattan season when hot winds carried dust from the Sahara, Aisha could no longer bear the sound of her husband's muffled sobs. She found him in his chamber, standing rigid against the wall, tears cutting clean tracks on his face. The sight of her proud husband reduced to this state shattered something inside her. "My love," she whispered, approaching him carefully as one might approach a wounded animal. "What's happening? Are you crying?" she asked. He was tired of lying and giving excuses, so he told her the challenges he was facing about not being able to lie down. "How long has this truly been happening?" Adebayo's response came as barely a whisper. "Since the shrine, since I ordered the shrine of Ajalorun destroyed." His voice cracked with the admission. Aisha remembered that day well. The ancient shrine had stood in the way of a new trading post Adebayo wanted to build in his compound. The village elders had protested, warning that the shrine was sacred ground, that moving it would anger the ancestors. But Adebayo, flush with wealth and convinced of his own importance, had ignored their warnings. He had paid men to demolish the shrine in the dead of night. "But there must be more," Aisha said, her mind working quickly. "The ancestors don't curse someone so severely over a single act of disrespect. There must be other wrongs that need to be righted." Her words caused Adebayo to flinch visibly, confirming her suspicions. Over the next several days, Aisha began a careful investigation. She spoke with the older servants who had been with the household longest, piecing together fragments of her husband's history. She visited the marketplace, listening to the whispered conversations that stopped when Adebayo approached. She consulted with her grandmother, a keeper of old wisdom. "A curse of standing," her grandmother explained, "burning sacred herbs in her small hut, is one of the most serious punishments the ancestors can inflict. It forces a person to face their deeds just as they once stood witness to their own crimes. Such a curse will not break until all truths are laid bare and all wrongs are made right." Armed with this knowledge, Aisha developed a plan. She began spending her evenings with Adebayo in his chamber, bringing soothing herbs and quietly encouraging him to talk. At first, he resisted, maintaining his pride even as exhaustion bent his shoulders and clouded his mind. But one particularly difficult night, when the pain of standing had become almost unbearable, Adebayo finally broke. "How can I speak of what I've done?" he whispered, his voice raw with emotion. "How can I tell you the kind of man you truly married? You would never look at me the same way again." Aisha moved closer, taking his trembling hands in hers. "My husband, the curse is already taking everything from you. Each night you stand here, it claims another piece of your spirit. Let me help you break free of it." The look that crossed Adebayo's face in that moment was one of both terror and profound relief. The expression of a man who had carried a crushing weight for so long that he had forgotten how to live without it. As the night deepened around them, he began to speak, and with each word, the air in the chamber grew heavier with the weight of long-buried truths. What emerged was not a single story, but a web of them, each thread connecting to others in ways that would take time and patience to unravel. Aisha listened without judgment, though her heart grew heavy with each revelation. She understood that breaking this curse would require more than just confession. It would demand action, restitution, and a complete transformation of the man she had married. As the first rays of dawn began to paint the sky, Aisha made a decision. She would stand with her husband through this journey, not just as his wife, but as his guide through the darkness of his past toward the light of redemption. But first, They would need help, the kind of help that could only come from those who walked between the world of the living and the realm of spirits. "Tomorrow," she said, her voice firm with purpose, "we will visit the village diviner. The cowrie shells will show us where to begin." That morning marked the beginning of their true journey together, though neither could have guessed the depths of darkness they would have to navigate before finding their way back to the light. As the sun rose over the village, casting long shadows across the compound, Aisha began making preparations for their visit to the diviner, knowing that each step forward would reveal new truths, each more difficult than the last. The village diviner's compound sat at the edge of the settlement, where neat rows of houses gave way to untamed forest. Even before sunrise, smoke from sacred herbs curled up from his compound, carrying prayers to the ancestors. As Aisha and Adebayo approached, they found the old man already waiting, his white robes glowing in the early morning light. "I have been expecting you," the diviner said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "The ancestors spoke of your coming in my dreams." The diviner's consultation chamber was small but meticulously arranged. Ancient charms hung from the rafters, their meanings known only to those versed in the old ways. The diviner's gnarled hands moved with surprising grace as he cast the sacred cowrie shells onto a wooden board carved with ancient symbols. Each shell made a distinct sound as it landed, like whispered secrets from the spirit world. As the shells settled into their final positions, the old man's clouded eyes widened with recognition. "Ah," he breathed, studying the pattern. "The shells speak of a brother's betrayal. They show me papers stained with more than just ink." His penetrating gaze fixed on Adebayo. "Speak the truth of your brother, merchant. Speak of Falami." The name struck Adebayo like a physical blow. Beside him, Aisha felt him sway slightly, the invisible force holding him upright, seeming to tighten its grip. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Falami was our father's firstborn," he began, each word seeming to cost him great effort. "The true heir to our family's trading business." The story spilled out of him then, like poison from an old wound. While Falami was away establishing trade routes to the northern kingdoms, Adebayo had methodically forged documents, altered their father's will, and convinced the village elders that he was the rightful heir. "I watched him right away," Adebayo continued, his voice hollow with remembered shame. "He was so proud, so eager to prove himself worthy of our father's legacy. He hugged me before he left, called me his trusted brother." His hands trembled as he spoke. "While he was gone, I worked in the shadows. Each forged document, each whispered lie to the elders, was like a knife in his back. When news came that he had established successful trade routes, I moved quickly. I couldn't risk him returning to claim his inheritance." The diviner listened in silence, his expression unchanging. But the cowrie shells on his divination board seemed to vibrate with each revelation, as if responding to the weight of truth finally spoken aloud. The search for Falami took them through many villages, following whispered stories of a once proud trader reduced to manual labor. They found him in a small farming community 3 days' journey from their home, his once strong frame bent from years of working other people's fields. The sight of his brother's reduced circumstances hit Adebayo harder than any physical blow. The reunion was explosive. Falami's initial rage upon seeing his brother was like a storm breaking over the savannah. He lunged at Adebayo with years of bitterness behind his fists, his roar of anger drawing onlookers from nearby farms. But Aisha stepped between them, her presence both gentle and immovable. "Let him speak," she said to Falami, her voice cutting through his rage like a cool breeze through stifling heat. "Let him right this wrong." What followed was a day of painful truth-telling. Under the shade of an ancient baobab tree, with the village elders as witnesses, Adebayo revealed everything. How he had systematically stolen his brother's birthright, how the guilt had eaten at him even as his stolen wealth grew. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold, he made his offer of restitution, the return of the inherited business, plus 2 decades of accumulated interest, along with the finest grazing lands in the region and a herd of prime cattle. Falami's acceptance of the restitution came slowly, not in words but in subtle shifts of posture and expression. By the time the moon rose, the brothers sat together, sharing palm wine and memories of their father. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. That night, for the first time since the curse began, Adebayo found he could bend slightly at the waist while standing. The relief was minimal, but it carried with it the promise of more to come. Aisha, watching her husband's tentative movements, understood that this was just the first thread in a complex tapestry of redemption they would need to weave. Their next step would take them to the river priestess, whose sacred waters were said to reflect not just one's face, but the very essence of one's soul. But for now, they focused on helping Falami reclaim his place in the world, knowing that true redemption required not just confession, but the patient work of rebuilding what had been broken. The journey to the river priestess marked their next step toward redemption. The sacred bend in the river where she made her home lay hidden behind a veil of mist, accessible only to those who knew the secret paths through the wetlands. Here, the water moved in strange patterns that seemed to whisper ancient secrets, and even the birds sang in different tongues. They found the priestess at dawn, her body decorated with intricate patterns in white chalk that seemed to shift and change in the morning light. She wore the sacred beads of her office, blue for the river spirits, white for the ancestors, and black for the deep mysteries that lay beneath the water's surface. "You bring a heavy burden to my waters," she said by way of greeting, her eyes focused not on Adebayo but on the air around him, where the curse's invisible force held him rigid. "Come, the waters will speak their truth." The ritual began with libations, palm wine poured into the river as offerings to the water spirits. The priestess led them to a pool separated from the main river by a natural rock formation. Here, the water was perfectly still, like a mirror reflecting the sky above. She began to chant in an ancient tongue as she scattered sacred herbs over the water's surface. As the ripples from the herbs settled, images began to form on the water's surface. Scenes from the past that Adebayo had tried desperately to forget. The priestess's voice cut through the humid air. "The waters show me fields of withered crops, children crying from hunger, families walking away from ancestral lands with empty bellies and heavy hearts." Under the combined weight of the curse and his wife's disappointed gaze, Adebayo confessed to orchestrating the Great Famine of 7 years past. His voice trembled as he described how he had obtained a subtle poison from a dark medicine man in the Northern Territories. The poison, when spread over his business rivals' crops, made the plants appear diseased without leaving any trace of foul play. "I waited until the harvest season was near," he admitted, unable to meet Aisha's eyes. When the crops began to wither, panic spread through the farming communities. Everyone feared their fields would be next. Price of land plummeted as families rushed to sell before the blight could spread to their plots. The river priestess's face remained impassive as the water showed images of families trudging away from their ancestral lands, children crying from hunger strapped to their mothers' backs. "And you were there," she said, offering to buy their land for a fraction of its worth. "I told myself I was helping them," Adebayo whispered, "giving them at least something for land that might soon be worthless. But I knew the blight would mysteriously vanish once the lands were mine." The task of making amends proved monumental. Back at their compound, Aisha developed a systematic approach, creating detailed records of every affected family. They traveled from village to village, tracking down those who'd been forced to relocate. Each family's story added another layer of shame to Adebayo's conscience. They found the Ogundimu family living in a remote fishing village, far from their farming roots. The eldest son, now a young man, remembered Adebayo clearly. "You came to our farm wearing fine robes," he said, his voice hard with remembered pain. "You spoke of helping us while our children starved." The process of restoration took months. It wasn't enough to simply return the land. Many families needed additional support to restart their farming operations. Adebayo provided seeds, tools, and livestock, along with compensation for years of lost income. For those who chose not to return to farming, he offered alternatives: training in trades, support for new businesses, education for their children. With each restitution, he found he could bend a little more, though standing remained his burden at night. The river priestess had warned them this would be the case. "Some sins leave deeper stains than others," she had said. "There are still darker truths to be faced." She was right. Even as they worked to right this wrong, Aisha could sense another truth weighing on her husband's conscience. But the curse would ensure that no truth remained buried forever. Their next step would take them to the medicine woman who lived in the cave at the edge of the forbidden forest. But first, they needed to complete the work of restoration here. Each family's return to prosperity was another step on the path to redemption, each reconciliation another small victory over the darkness in Adebayo's past. As they worked, news of their mission spread throughout the region. Some praised Adebayo's efforts to make amends, while others whispered that no amount of restitution could truly compensate for the suffering he had caused. But Aisha understood that this wasn't about earning forgiveness. It was about facing the truth and doing what was right, regardless of whether redemption was possible. One evening, as they watched a family move back into their restored farm, the youngest child ran up to Adebayo with a handful of fresh corn from their first harvest. The simple gesture of innocence and gratitude brought tears to his eyes. In that moment, Aisha saw clearly how far her husband had come and how far he still had to go. Their journey led them next to a powerful medicine woman who lived in a cave at the edge of the forbidden forest. She welcomed them with warm herbs and cooling drinks, though her eyes held ancient wisdom that made Adebayo tremble. She saw in her sacred fire what Adebayo had buried deepest in his heart, the truth about his first wife's death. As the flames danced, casting shadows on the cave walls, the medicine woman spoke. "The fire shows me a woman who knew too much, who carried dangerous knowledge. It shows me a cursed charm, given with false love." Under the weight of the medicine woman's knowing gaze, Adebayo confessed to a crime that shocked even Aisha to her core. His first wife, Folasade, had discovered evidence of his corrupt business practices: the forged documents, the stolen lands, the poisoned crops. She had threatened to expose him to the village elders. "I went to a dark medicine man," Adebayo admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "He created a charm that would slowly drain her life force. I gave it to her as a gift, telling her it was a protection charm from the northern kingdoms." His hands shook as he spoke. She wore it gratefully, not knowing that each day it drew her closer to death. When she finally passed, everyone believed it was a wasting illness. This revelation nearly shattered Aisha's resolve to help him. She spent 7 days in seclusion, praying and seeking guidance from the ancestors. The knowledge that her husband had murdered his first wife with such calculated cruelty tested the very limits of her commitment to helping him break the curse. When she emerged from her seclusion, her eyes were hard with purpose. "You must do more than simply repent," she declared. "You must build something that will honor Folasade's memory and protect those she sought to defend." Under Aisha's guidance, they established a foundation to help widows and orphans in the village. The foundation would provide not just food and shelter, but training in trades that would allow them to support themselves with dignity. Moreover, it would serve as a place where vulnerable members of the community could safely report abuses of power without fear of retribution. But even as they worked to establish the foundation, the medicine woman warned them that one final truth remained: the darkest moment that had truly birthed Adebayo's fortune. This led them to seek out the mysterious hermit who lived deep in the forest, where the final and most terrible truth would emerge. The path to his dwelling was not marked on any map. It revealed itself only to those with the greatest need. After 3 days of traveling through increasingly dense forest, they found his home, a cave illuminated by strange phosphorescent fungi that cast everything in an ethereal blue glow. The hermit himself seemed barely corporeal, his thin frame wrapped in tattered robes that might once have been white, but his eyes held an intensity that stripped away all pretense, boring straight through flesh into soul. He spoke not a word of greeting, simply gestured for them to sit on worn cushions near a small fire. "Speak," the hermit commanded after long moments of silence, "of the day your wealth truly began." Adebayo's voice trembled as he recounted finding a wealthy merchant trapped beneath his overturned wagon on a treacherous bend in the road. The merchant had been returning from a successful trading journey, his wagon laden with gold, diamonds, and precious jewels. The accident had left him pinned beneath the heavy wood, seriously injured but alive. "Help me," the merchant had pleaded, reaching out a bloodied hand. My children, they wait for my return." But Adebayo, seeing more wealth than he had ever dreamed of, made a choice that would haunt him forever. Instead of helping the injured man, he methodically gathered all the valuables he could carry. He worked quickly, efficiently, as the merchant's pleas grew weaker. "I told myself he would die anyway," Adebayo confessed, his voice hollow with shame. "That taking the wealth would at least ensure it wasn't wasted. But I knew he might have lived if I had helped him instead of robbing him." The hermit's eyes never left Adebayo's face as he spoke. When the confession was complete, the old man stood and retrieved a small mirror made of polished obsidian. "Look," he commanded, holding it before Adebayo's face. "See yourself as you were in that moment." The reflection that appeared was not Adebayo's current face, but rather his younger self, methodically gathering wealth while a man died beside him. The image was so clear, so precise in its horror, that Aisha had to turn away. This revelation nearly broke her resolve to help him. She spent 7 days in seclusion, praying and seeking guidance from the ancestors. When she emerged, her eyes were hard with purpose. "We must find his family," she declared. "We must tell them the truth they have waited 20 years to hear." The search for the merchant's family led them to a modest compound on the outskirts of a distant town. The merchant's children, now adults with children of their own, had lived in poverty, believing their father had simply disappeared with their fortune. The meeting was heart-wrenching, with reactions ranging from rage to grief to bitter acceptance. The eldest son wanted Adebayo imprisoned, but the youngest daughter, after many days of contemplation, suggested a different form of justice. Adebayo would dedicate his remaining life and wealth to establishing schools and orphanages throughout the kingdom, ensuring that no child would ever have to grow up in the poverty they had endured. The transformation of Adebayo's wealth into a force for good became their life's work. Over the years that followed, they established dozens of schools and orphanages. Each institution was named in honor of the merchant, ensuring his story and legacy would live on. The schools became centers of hope and learning, producing scholars, traders, and leaders who would help shape the kingdom's future. The curse broke gradually, not in a single moment, but through sustained commitment to living differently. Each new school opened, each child educated, each life improved, seemed to loosen the invisible force's grip slightly. The man who had once stood watching another die for profit now stood proudly watching children learn and grow in the schools he had founded. As news of Adebayo's transformation spread, people began to view his story not just as a cautionary tale, but as proof that redemption was possible for even the darkest of deeds. The schools and orphanages became living monuments to the power of truth and the possibility of change. Today, travelers passing through the kingdom will find not a wealthy merchant's compound, but a network of schools and orphanages that serve as beacons of hope and learning. The granaries burst with food meant to feed hungry students, and the corrals teem with cattle whose milk nourishes those who would otherwise go without. The shrine of Ajalorun, restored and honored, now includes a new teaching that curses can become blessings when they lead us to face our truths and right our wrongs. And in the quiet hours of night, when the moon bathes the village in silver light, Adebayo sleeps peacefully beside his wife, their hearts at last unburdened by the weight of truth. The story of the curse of standing is now told throughout the land, not as a tale of punishment, but as proof that it is never too late to change, to make amends, and to transform past sins into future blessings.